Right, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's my pleasure to introduce Rosa Illan to you. Rosa studied Spanish language and literature at Murcia and at the University of North Carolina, followed by an MA in theoretical and applied linguistics. She is currently working on her PhD in cognitive linguistics under the supervision of Javier Valenzuela and Elvira Maniero, during which she spent a shorter research stay at Erlangen in Germany and a longer one at the University of California, San Diego. Wise choice, I think. The title of her PhD thesis is Time in the Creative Mind, Understanding Spatial Dynamic Construals of Time. And my understanding is that it is about to be submitted this month or the next. However, today Rosa is actually going to talk about something entirely different, namely metaphorical co-speech gestures of arithmetic, adding and subtracting in English and Spanish, to which I'm very much looking forward. So without further ado, I would like to say, Rosa, we're looking forward to a talk, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Peter. I will share my screen. So I want to thank Peter for giving me the chance to be here today. I'm so excited to share this research with all of you. And today I will be talking about metaphorical code-speech gestures of arithmetic, adding and subtracting in English and Spanish. And this is part of the research that we are recently developing in the Daedalus Lab at the University of Murcia, where I currently work on my PhD. Let's start. When we talk about mathematics, we are actually talking about one of the most abstract, complex, and precise human conceptual systems. However, we can also differentiate some basic abilities that we have related with number that we share with other species and seem to be much more simple and basic than when we usually understand as mathematics. One of these abilities is subitizing. So for instance, given these three cubes, we can almost immediately discern which of the cubes has the highest number of dots and how many dots are there in each of them. However, given these cubes, it is much more complex for us to know quickly which of the cubes has the highest amount of dots and how many dots are in each of them. This ability of subitizing, which, by the way, this word comes from the Latin subito, which means sudden, implies that we have an ability to recognize small quantities of up to 3 or 4 items in an almost immediate way. But when we talk about mathematics and arithmetics in particular, that process involves much more than this basic capacity to subitize and estimate quantities. So we have additional capacities that allow us to extend this certainty and precision that we get with subitizing towards more complex amounts of quantities. So one of these abilities is that of counting. But what specific cognitive capacities do we need for mathematics and for arithmetics? Núñez and Lakoff, in their work Where Mathematics Come From, already established some of these capacities. The ones that I have presented here on the left are capacities that we already need even for subitizing. Then if we want to go beyond subitizing capacity, so dealing with higher quantities, we would need also the combinatorial grouping capacity or symbolizing capacity, which refers to the ability that we have to associate symbols to abstract concepts such as numbers. And then there are a group of capacities that we use in our everyday lives, that we use them for many different purposes, that have proven to be quite useful for the understanding of mathematical concepts. And these abilities include spatial relations in image schemas, conceptual metaphor, and conceptual blends. In particular, spatial relations are quite useful for mathematical thinking, and it's been proven that for people who are good at mathematics are also quite good at spatial thinking. And in fact, number and space are quite related. Think, for instance, about the number line, where we locate numbers as points along a line, along space. And then we have also image schemas, these basic concepts that allow us to understand other more complex ideas, such as mathematics, but also others such as time, for instance. In the case of mathematics in particular, the schemas of container and source path goal are quite useful. Think about the operations of addition and subtraction, in which we think about putting objects inside a container for adding or removing objects from that container when we want to subtract. And regarding the source path goal image schema, we have the importance of motion for understanding mathematical concepts. So especially it is useful, the concept of fictive motion established by Talmy, by which we assign motion to elements that do not have motion. For instance, we say things such as the road runs along the coast, even though we know that the road is not really moving. And these abilities are also used in mathematics. So we say that two lines meet at a point, or we can also use these abilities for talking about graphs. When we say that numbers go up or down, they reach the top, reach the bottom, and stuff like that. And then we also have two other cognitive capacities, which are conceptual metaphor and conceptual blends. Lakoff and Núñez already established the importance of these aspects for not only for other aspects of our daily lives, but also for mathematical thinking. And these conceptual metaphors and conceptual integration processes help us to go beyond basic arithmetic and basic sabitizing to get to understand better complex mathematical ideas. So there are two central conceptual metaphors that underpin concepts of arithmetics. And these are arithmetic is collecting objects and arithmetic is motion along a path. For the first one, we view numbers as collections of objects, and these collections of objects can be modified by means of arithmetic operations. So we remove or add objects to a collection. And the arithmetic is motion along a path, understands numbers as points in space, and arithmetic operations imply motion along those points in space, which are numbers. So regarding the arithmetic is collecting objects, if we relate it to the concept of addition, addition in these terms is understood as adding objects to a collection. So we would have something similar to this, which again is also using the image schema of a container. And this conceptual metaphor is present in our everyday language. We use the word add for many different contexts related to this act of adding objects to a collection. So we can say that we add salt to the salad, for instance. But when talking about mathematical thinking and about arithmetic operations, we also use expressions such as, if you add 4 apples to 5 apples, how many apples do you have? And this idea of arithmetic as collecting objects also deals that adding implies creating something bigger because of this idea of adding objects to a collection. And this is also applied to numbers. So we can say that 7 is bigger than 5, even though we know that numbers are abstract concepts which do not really have a size. And then the opposite pattern will be that of subtraction, in which we remove objects from a collection. And in this case, again, this conceptual metaphor can be seen in our everyday use of language, and in particular in arithmetic operations. And so let's see, for example, this sentence here. If you take 2 apples from 5 apples, how many apples do you have? So here also subtracting yields something smaller as opposed to adding, which implies something bigger. And again, it is related to the size of numbers. And then for the second metaphor, arithmetic is motion along a path, we have that addition is related with motion along this lateral axis rightwards. So we have the number line and we move from left to right for adding numbers and increasing in quantity. And then for subtraction, we have the opposite pattern of leftwards motion. Regarding this metaphor and this notion of a number line, it's been proven that we humans use a mental number line that has been also shown in the snark effect. This snark effect states that, for instance, for people who use left to right writing or reading systems, they are capable of identifying small numbers more quickly with their left hand and big numbers more quickly with their right hand, for instance. And many experiments have been carried out in this particular field. And also related to this concept of the number line, we can say that numbers are close or far apart from each other, depending on the point in space that they have in that line. And it also leads to expressions such as count up to 10 without skipping any numbers, or count backwards from 10. But what we wanted to see is whether these cognitive capacities, which are present in our language, and we already have a lot of evidence for that, are also reflected in gestures, and if so, in what ways are they reflected in gestures? So some previous studies have addressed this topic. In particular, Núñez and Marguetis have been carrying out small experiments in the lab, in which they were giving some stimuli to the subjects to prove that they would activate one of those two conceptual metaphors of arithmetic when talking about adding and subtracting. But the problem with this is that this study was carried out in very limited and selected context of the lab, of course. So we wanted to know what happens when we look at more naturalistic context. And one first step on this was the recently carried out work by Alcaraz Carrion et al., in which they used the Newscape database for studying how speakers gesture when they are talking about addition and subtraction. But what hasn't been done so far is a comparison with other languages different than English and how speakers gesture for talking about arithmetic operations. So what I wanted to present now is what happens with Spanish. What do Spanish people do when they gesture for talking about conceptual metaphor or conceptual blends regarding arithmetics? So for doing my study, I used the Newscape database. I know some of those in the audience already know very well Newscape, but for those who don't, Newscape is an audiovisual database of TV programs. And the videos are associated with their closed captions so that we can have not only audiovisual material, but also linguistic material. So we can perform linguistic searches and we get the videos in which speakers are uttering the expression that we search for. So in particular, because I will focus on Spanish now, I searched on the Spanish collection of Newscape. Newscape has a database that includes data in different languages, being English and Spanish the two biggest collections. And in particular, the Spanish collection has 23,000 hours of recordings and 120 million words. And it includes recordings from 2007 to the present. And regarding the channels, it has channels from Mexican Spanish and then others from Spanish TV from Spain. As for the searches that we performed to do the study, we selected 4 verbs regarding addition: sumar, agregar, añadir, and incorporar, and 4 verbs regarding subtraction: restar, quitar, sustraer, and detraer. And of course, these different verbs can have different meanings and different nuances depending on the context in which they appear. But what we tried to do for this study was to get only those contexts and those hits in which the use of these verbs was associated with what we were interested in, with the meaning of addition and subtraction in arithmetic terms. So we found a similar number of hits between both groups of words. And we took a sample of each and ended up having 98 code speech gestures for addition and 80 code speech gestures for subtraction, leading to a total of 178 code speech gestures. So what we did was analyzing these code speech gestures regarding their axis, whether they were developed on the sagittal, vertical, or lateral axis, and also regarding the direction of the gesture, whether it was rightwards, leftwards, away from the body, towards the body, and so on. And the preliminary results show that most code speech gestures were produced along the sagittal or the lateral axis. And in particular, regarding the sagittal axis, there was a preference for using addition construal, and in the lateral axis, there was a preference for using the subtraction construal, but overall, there is a general preference in both types of construals for the sagittal axis. Regarding the direction of motion of the gestures, we found that for addition, the sagittal gestures were carried out away from the body, and the lateral gestures were carried out rightwards. And for subtraction, the sagittal gestures were carried out towards the body, and the lateral gestures were carried out leftwards. A first look into the examples that we have seems to show that when speakers use the sagittal axis in their gestures, they seem to be activating the arithmetic is collecting objects metaphor. And when they use the lateral axis, they seem to be activating the arithmetic is motion along a path metaphor. But of course, there are some exceptions to this idea, but this is like a general pattern that we have observed. And let's see some of the results that we found. Let's start with the addition gestures that are carried out along the sagittal axis.
Madrid, Andalucía, por cierto, hay que sumar también el voto de Ceuta. Madrid.
Muchas piezas que sumar, Florida. Muchas piezas que sumar, Florida.
Según el Ministerio de Fomentos, los 7 millones de euros, y a esta cantidad hay que sumarlos también los desperfectos. Hablarán de esta y otra.
En ambos casos se busca sumar para romper el bloqueo político.
De manera que como nosotros queremos sumar,
So,
un poquito más, y podríamos añadir
sí.
seguramente media pulgada más. Por eso se
there is a recurrent gesture for indicating addition, like adding objects in front of the speaker.
No hay un solo periodista en Madrid que no pueda añadir un cuarto de opinión más negativa sobre lo horrible que están haciendo los independentistas, todo porque estamos todos de acuerdo.
Can you see the videos correctly? Because for me, they get frozen a little bit. So
Unfortunately, they lag behind, so we don't see exactly what's happening, I think. At least I don't.
Sorry, okay, let's try again.
No hay un solo periodista en Madrid que no pueda añadir un cuarto de opinión más negativa sobre lo horrible que están haciendo los independentistas, todo porque estamos todos de acuerdo.
En cambios de planes, muchos tuvieron que agregar el vencimiento de sus visas.
Okay, so those were some examples of the addition gestures on the sagittal axis. And now let's see some of the examples on the lateral axis. As you will see, all of them are carried out rightwards to the right.
El servicio social de la mujer, cambiamos de asunto, que era obligatorio cumplir durante el franquismo, podrá sumar para obtener la jubilación anticipada.
Básicamente de apoyar, de sumar los esfuerzos de todos.
Lo importante es aportar un punto de vista nuevo. Y yo creo que eso no viene a decir que este es el único importante, sino que viene a sumar con otros que ya conocíamos.
And now there is another group of gestures that we found for addition. In these gestures, speakers use the lateral axis, but surprisingly, they do a leftwards gesture, which seems to be incongruent with the idea of a number line. But this happens because here speakers are not activating that number line, but rather they are using the collecting objects metaphor. So they take an object with their right hand and put it somewhere on their left.
Social. La añadió
la política social que antes estaba.
Okay, so are you now seeing the videos, right? For me, they are working now, but
just a few frames. You could always unshare and share with Optimize for video clip. That will not be good for. Oh, you did. Okay.
I did that. Yeah, sorry, because when I tried it, it was working perfectly, but it seems that on Zoom it's getting. Yeah.
Usually we get some lag in Zoom.
La añadió la política social que antes estaba.
So here, speaker is doing this gesture of from right to left and taking something and put it in somewhere else. And then we have another group of gestures of addition. They use the lateral axis, but in this case, they are instead of going rightwards or leftwards, it's like the speaker is bringing their hands together, showing how they are collecting somehow a group of objects and bringing them together in front of them.
Preparándose para sumar fuerzas en ese acto.
So it's like this type of gesture. What's this doing?
Preparándose para sumar.
Intentemos sumar el mayor número de votos y de
ahí hay que sumar a otros actores y hay que.
So yeah, so all of these were like doing this, which is like collecting objects and bringing them together in front of the speaker. And now the sagittal gestures for subtraction are normally used backwards or towards the speaker. So the speaker brings their hands towards him or her.
Que dos votos de Navarra podrían restar.
So he is doing something like this when he says the word subtract, which is restar in this case in Spanish.
Competición depredadora en la que se restan entre sí, ¿no?
Now like a recurrent gesture of going backwards. And the same happens here.
Pero también es cierto que le puede restar votos a...
La derecha y sus tres siglas, si tienen oportunidad, sumarán para restar derechos, para multar.
Again, a gesture pointing backwards with the thumb.
Que nos dicen que no solo no sumamos, sino que restamos. Tenemos menos votos y menos.
Esa falta de gestión es por lo que se restó deuda.
Por un lado, me vas a restar de la red eléctrica.
Ni tampoco te van a restar de tu pago si es que el gobierno.
Again, doing the backwards gesture. And then for the lateral axis, for subtraction, speakers tended to do a leftwards movement.
De 74. Pero ojo, si a esto le restamos las 8 horas que pasamos.
So when she's saying the word subtract, she's doing, if we subtract this, doing the gesture to the left.
Semanas el presidente Trump ha pasado de restarle importancia a la pandemia del coronavirus.
And then subtract with a gesture to the left again.
Presidente, querido Pablo, me acaban de quitar 20 años de encima. Toma buena nota.
Here also gesture to the left. And more. Okay, and then we get other specific gestures that we found with subtraction, where in the lateral axis was one of shortening the number line somehow. Like it's similar to the one of bringing the hands together for addition, but this has a totally different meaning. It's not collecting objects, but rather shortening the number line. So it's like if we subtract, we make the number line shorter.
Lo que estamos diciendo es que si restamos años para que ese...
Okay, I'll play it again.
Lo que estamos diciendo es que si restamos años para que ese...
Okay, so he does something like this. And then we found also some vertical gestures, not many, just a few. With subtraction, we didn't find any with addition, but with subtraction, the ones we found were doing a movement downwards in the vertical axis.
Lo que hacemos es que te lo restamos de tu factura de la luz. Vale.
So he's saying we subtract doing the movement backwards. Sorry, not backwards, but downwards. in the vertical axis. And then there is a third group of expressions beyond the ones that I have already presented about addition and subtraction with the 4 verbs in each of the categories. We also wanted to include expressions in which speakers were saying number plus number, like 2 plus 3 and stuff like that, or 2 minus 3. But the problem we found is that we didn't have enough hits in the Spanish collection of Newscape for studying this. So I didn't include that in the graphs in the results that I previously presented, but I wanted to include some of the gestures that we found for number plus number. They were very few hits, but still I think they were interesting, and all of them were carried out along the lateral axis, following the number line pattern. So because they are all related to addition, n plus n, they go to the right.
Adolescente. 13 años más los 40 más 6 de nosotros.
So she's saying 13 years plus 40. And then here.
Auditiva.
Pues si me preguntan 67 más 7, yo no puedo hacer 74.
And here the boy is saying 67 plus 7, 74. So going rightwards.
¿Saben la importancia de sumar 1 más 1?
So she's doing 1 plus 1. So if we take into account the results found by Alcaraz Carrión, Alibali, and Valenzuela regarding English, we found very similar results regarding the use of the sagittal and lateral axis with the away and towards or rightwards, leftwards motion. So for the sagittal gesture direction in English, they found that there is a preference for away motion for talking about addition, and towards motion for talking about subtraction. And regarding the lateral gesture direction, they found a preference for rightwards movement when talking about addition, and a leftwards movement for talking about subtraction. Let's see some of their examples.
And she said, when you add another commitment, you have to subtract one. Get your husband to walk the dog because.
And in these gestures, for example, you can see that she's saying add and subtract, and it's very clear that idea of collecting objects from a collection for subtracting.
Et cetera, et cetera. Exports. So if you run a trade deficit, that subtracts from GDP.
Now a subtract gesture that goes to the left.
The deeds, when you think about if you subtract the polarizing business model of the media, you have.
And again, subtract with that idea of collecting something from somewhere else in the sagittal axis.
And so he worries much more about subtraction than he does about addition, and to win.
And here, placing subtraction on the left and addition to the right.
And
regarding the general preference for gesture axis, taking into account all of the expressions, they found a preference for the lateral axis. They found more gesture carried out on the lateral axis. This is different from what we have so far from Spanish data. We have much more gestures in the sagittal axis, but this is we cannot extract conclusions from these very clearly, because in their study they included the n plus n and n minus n constructions, because there were enough hits for the English version of these constructions, not for the Spanish one. So it is it's due to that, because many of the gestures used in the lateral axis were related with the n plus n and n minus n expressions. However, even removing from their data the n plus n and the n minus n expressions, still there is a little bit more of preference for lateral than sagittal axis, but it decreases considerably from the graph that we have here. So it is not a crazy idea, the fact that in Spanish there could be a preference for the sagittal axis, if we take into account the fact that in Spanish there is a tendency to conceptualize abstract entities or abstract concepts in terms of quantity, as it happens with time. For instance, we understand time in terms of space, but also in terms of quantity. So we say much time or few time, as opposed to the English version of long time or short time. If Spanish people tend to use more the sagittal axis for talking about addition and subtraction, it could indicate that there is a preference for talking about quantities using that metaphor of collecting objects and removing objects and adding to a collection than in English. But as I said before, we still need to look deeper into this to see if there is really a tendency and a clear difference between English and Spanish on this aspect. So the conclusions that we have so far indicate that current data in English and Spanish suggest that speakers activate conceptual metaphors of arithmetic as motion along a path or as collecting objects. And they express these metaphors not only in the language, but also in the gestures. When speaking about addition, there is a tendency to produce lateral rightwards movements, following the idea of a number line, or sagittal movements away from the body. And when speaking about subtraction, there is a tendency to produce lateral leftwards movements or sagittal movements that go towards the body. So one of the ideas in which we are working on now is on focusing more on this possible preference of English for the use of the lateral axis versus the preference of Spanish for the sagittal axis. And we are working on this. So we will hopefully have some more results on this soon. And that's all so far. Thank you so much.